Okay. Well, it's really strange to be recording on a Tuesday night. So this is just messing with my head all over the place. But thanks for being here. We're going to do our book study tonight. Tomorrow night, Scott is going to be leading conversations. Well, I am getting Lori and James married. So that'll be interesting. Okay, before we dive in, once as always, anything that y'all want to talk about? Anything that from last week that you've been thinking about? Any questions? Any notes in your margin that you want to deal with? I don't know, huh?
Well, I was listening to, I watched this afternoon from last week's, and you mentioned moments of joy and how Brother Lawrence had moments of, and you string them up. So I had moments of joy and I'm stringing them up. It was wonderful.
Ellen just got back from a road trip up to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And she was texting me and sending me pictures the whole time. I felt like I was reading her journal.
I know.
You had some really good breakthroughs, some nice momentary glimpses along your way. And I know this isn't the time for it, but tomorrow night, hopefully you'll be able to hear more about her trip and some of the breakthroughs that she had in terms of presence, because it was pretty cool. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're gonna start on the 12th letter tonight. And I think there's only 16, so we're getting down to it. And then there's just the spiritual maxims after that. And we can probably go through those pretty quickly. And then I think we'll dive into the Just This book by Richard Rohr and see how that does us for a while. And it took me like 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get that book, so really should start ordering now, I guess, now that I think about it.
You have a hyperlink game for an order on Amazon?
Say again, Scott?
You have a hyperlink for ordering it on Amazon?
I will get one, and I will text it out to you all so that you can get the orders happening. Oh, there's Judy. Beautiful.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hey, Judy.
And because it did, I don't know why it took so long to get that book, but we should probably get it ordered quickly just in case. But I think it'll be a good one for us. A good follow on to this, especially this letter right now. This 12th letter is a real kind of how to. So let's dive into it. Again, he's talking to his favorite Reverend Mother N. So it seems that most of his letters are to her. She's the one who was sick in the last letter and seems to be really struggling with a lot of the teaching and the methodology that he has for practicing presence, because he's coming back to her all the time. This one is interesting, though. He says, "My dear Reverend Mother, since you earnestly wish me to impart to you the method that I have followed to reach this state of the presence of God, which our Lord in his mercy has allowed me to attain, I must tell you that it is only with great reluctance that I am giving way to your importunities, and only on condition that you will allow no one to see my letter." That's kind of interesting, huh? "If I thought you would allow anyone to see it, all my desire for your advancement on the way to perfection would not persuade me to write it. Here's what I can tell you about it." So I was thinking about this for a while. What is it? Hold on a sec. Oh, okay. I guess I'm not going to be able to show you. I wanted to show you I'll read it to you though. Hopefully I can read it to you. Let's see. Oh, maybe I can show you. I know I'm talking to myself. Sorry about that. But here we go. Okay. So how do I get back to you all? There you are. Okay, so what I was thinking about with this is, do any of you have some ideas of why you think that Brother Lawrence would want to keep his letters secret? Why is it that he is so reluctant to put this down in writing and send it to him? Any thoughts or guesses on that?
Maybe he didn't want to stop doing what he's doing, and maybe they kind of let people take their turns.
Okay,
Possibly he didn't want anything taken out of context in light of the other conversations and the depth they went into. He knows she would understand what he meant by some of the verbiage, and possibly was considering the fact that somebody outside the intimate conversations and discussions about what he writes to her may misunderstand some of it, or misinterpret his intention behind it.
interesting. That is-
I found myself thinking of maybe some kind of humility. Like I didn't want to, like he didn't want to. I'm not quite sure what the thought is, but it seemed like a humble thing to do. It's almost like when we give to charity and we're doing it in private kind of thing.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I was
That
gonna-
would certainly fit with Lawrence's character, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say the same thing. He doesn't want to sound like he's bragging. See how close I am to God. See, look at me. You know that.
Right. Right.
Look at my faith.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy and peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
But the others are
maintain a certain level of anonymity, so that somebody wouldn't think that he was trying to be more than he was. A lesson in humility for him.
Mhm. Yeah.
By anonymity.
You guys got your thinking caps on tonight. Those are some good.
Could
good
it also,
suggestions. Yeah, Ken.
Maybe for
Oh.
her, maybe it was specific. You know how sometimes you give spiritual guidance and it's specific for that person. And isn't that the doctrine, or not, I wouldn't even say doctrine, but the spiritual thought is wonky in any way, but it's really for her specifically.
yes, that's what I was going to say, Lori. That this could be easily seen as a template for spirituality, and he didn't want others to see it as something that this is the one size fits all, kind of what you were saying, Lori, that this is individual for her.
Mhm. I like that. Any other thoughts? Well, in the other translation that I'm always bringing up to you all, he put a little editorial note right at the end of this paragraph, and he said, I guess she didn't respect his request.
Right. Right.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have this letter, right? 300 years later. I thought that was pretty funny. But one of the things that I was thinking about is, isn't it interesting that Jesus, as far as we know, didn't write anything down? Nothing.
Sure.
And Lao Tzu, who is credited with being the founder of Taoism, didn't write anything down either. And he was pestered and asked to please write down his thoughts and his wisdom. And he kept declining and wouldn't write anything down. And there was a reason for that. And this is what I wanted to read you. There's an answer to the question of why didn't Lao Tzu write anything down? And so let's take a look at this for a second, and then see if maybe it applies to Brother Lawrence, maybe it doesn't. Let's see. All right, can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So so the question was, why didn't Lao Tzu write until the very end of his life? He writes, for 90 years, Lao Tzu refused to write anything or to say anything. This was his basic attitude, that truth cannot be taught. The moment you say something about truth, it is no more true. This is really true. If you don't know how to be silent, it becomes heavy. It is not that by saying things you communicate. No, it is by saying things that you unburden yourself, but it is very difficult to communicate what you want. What feeling you have inside sharing it, what feeling the person has while listening to it. Now, obviously, he's not a native English speaker, so his prose is a little strange. This next paragraph is the traditional story of how and why Lao Tzu finally wrote down the basic core of his teaching, which is called the Tao Te Ching. He was crossing the border alone, and the guard on the border imprisoned him. The guard was also a disciple, and the guard said, unless you write a book, I'm not going to allow you to move beyond the border. Held him captive, in other words. This much you must do for humanity. Write a book. That is the debt you have to pay. Otherwise, I won't allow you to cross. So for 3 days, Lao Tzu was imprisoned by his own disciple. So Lao Tzu had to write the book. And in 3 days, he finished it. And the first thing that he has to say is that whatever can be said cannot be true. Now, in most translations of the Tao Te Ching, it'll read, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. But it's the same idea. Whatever can be said cannot be true. Why can't the truth be said? What is the difficulty? The truth cannot be said for many reasons. The first and most basic reason is truth is always realized in silence. When your inner thought has stopped, then it is realized. And that which is realized in silence, how can you say it through sound? It is an experience. It was said when Einstein was alive that only 12 persons, a dozen in the whole world, understood him and what he was saying. But even that is enough. Bhagavad Gita, Holy Bible, and Tao Te Ching are interpreted by hundreds of persons and has hundreds of meanings. What Lord Krishna said in Gita, it has come from his experience, but what we understand is a bit different. This is why Lao Tzu said, whatever can be said cannot be true. Now, if you take that a little bit further, the other thing that he was worried about is that once and this is getting back to kind of what Lori and Ken were talking about. Once something is reduced to words, it becomes static. It's not moving anymore. It's not part of the experience. It's frozen. And then it can become, what the Old Testament calls a graven image. The Jews were disallowed from producing any graven image, any idol of their God, because then people end up worshiping that instead of the truth behind it, the actual experience behind it that is always in motion. And so for that reason, Lao Tzu didn't want to put anything down. It was really something that should have remained an oral tradition, something that should have just been taught from disciple to student so that the student can experience in real time the truth need ever be expressed. Now, I don't know if any of this is going through Brother Lawrence's head. It may be something just like what you were all talking about. I don't know. But this is where my mind went, because if you really are a contemplative, if you really are a mystic, what you're experiencing really cannot be communicated. The great mystics who have written and left books for us and descriptions of their experiences have tried the best they can to put things into words, but it's a far cry from being the real thing. And so we have to be careful when we read the experiences and even the methodologies of contemplatives and mystics to make sure that we're not getting bogged down in the words themselves, or to think, as somebody said, maybe it was Ken, that one size fits all, because it's never going to be that way. Each one of us is going to experience things differently, and each one of us may have a different methodology and a different way of practicing presence and practicing the contemplative in order to get to those mystical experiences. But I think it's just important for us to keep in mind that the written word can only point. It is not truth itself. And I know I'd get run out on a rail in many churches for saying that about the Bible, but I mean, what else can we say? Spiritual language is metaphorical at best. It's a pointer, but it is supposed to evoke our own experience and our own journey, so that we are not just passively trying to, download these words, but actually using the words as a springboard to experience what we're going to experience. And then we can try to express that best we can. And it'll be just as misunderstood and misinterpreted as the words we got to begin with, right? Any thoughts on any of this?
It's interesting. I'm playing with Chat GPT.
Oh no, say it ain't so,
Oh, right.
Me too. I love it.
Me three.
And I asked it, why didn't Jesus write anything down, something to the effect of that. And basically it came up with the same thing, what the oral tradition was. And it could have been that, you know, he was a carpenter by trade and didn't have the educational training. And then it says, you know, his focus was on direct interactions with his disciples and the people he encountered. He prioritized spreading his message and teachings to those around him rather than writing them down. And then the emphasis on personal connection, and let's see. Oh, and his primary goal was to inspire change and a transformation of heart and spirit. He aimed to encourage people to live righteous and compassionate lives rather than focusing on the dissemination of written texts. So, and
You
others.
refine it? Did you say, please refine and make more elegant, or you know how you can prompt it and it will totally even make
I
it
just
elegant?
downloaded ChatGPT yesterday, so I don't know all the nuances. I still have
Yeah,
to.
if you prompt it like 2 or 3 times down, it
Mhm.
gets better and better. But sometimes it makes me laugh because it says, I really can't fully explain this because it is not in my expertise. However, ...
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Dave, you should play with it.
That's what
Come on,
Alexa
Dave,
says
I thought
too.
about you for sermons.
No, I refuse. You will not be hearing any chat GPT
Hey.
or whatever from me.
From the
You would
pulpit.
inspire. Dave,
Nope. I'm gonna be a
Chat
Luddite.
GPT can even clone you. Did you know that? It can clone your face. You use software and it can clone your voice, and you can speak in multi languages and be able to spread. Now, this part would be real, where you could take your message and spread it to different languages of people that you would really like to see get your message or hear your message. I can see your excitement on your face. Never mind.
Yep, not gonna happen. Although my voice has been cloned by AI, because I did a podcast where they lost parts of the audio, but they still had another mic that at least picked up the text. And so with their permission, with my permission, I read a little blip that the AI uses to capture all the sounds that it needs. And then it cloned my voice and it was able to read the part that was dropped on the mic. And it sounds like my voice, but it doesn't have the right cadence. It kind of sounded like, you know, those disclaimers at the end of ads on the radio that go really fast. It was kind of like that. So it didn't have the right timing and cadence, but at least you could understand it, and there wasn't a dropout in the middle of the podcast. But so yes, I did allow that to happen, but I don't really intend to do it myself.
Mm.
So anyways, however you look at this, you know, it's just kind of interesting that he would take this stand with her. And I thought it was interesting, so I just wanted to explore it a little bit. But for my money, I think it is a warning not to get too bogged down, overloaded. You know, don't hold these words up on too high of a pedestal. They're mere pointers. And I think that's what he's trying to get. This is what I did. And I'm going to tell you what I did. He says, here's what I can tell you about it. But you need to experience it yourself. It's the thrust of it. And also it's an expression of his humility and everything else that you all brought up as well. So here we go. Here's what I can tell you about his method. Having found different methods of going to God and different practices to attain the spiritual life in several books, I decided that they would serve more to hinder than to facilitate me in what I was seeking. So he didn't like the books at the time that he was reading about coming to God, which was nothing other than a means to be holy gods. So that's his goal. You know, what he was seeking was simply to be none other than a means to be holy gods, to belong to God completely. This made me decide to give all, to gain all. So after having given all to God in satisfaction for my sins, I began to live as if there were no one in the world but him and me. Sometimes I considered myself before him as a poor criminal at the feet of his judge. At other times I looked on him in my heart as my Father and as my God. I adored him as often as I could, keeping my mind in his holy presence and recalling it as often as it wandered. I had no little difficulty in this exercise, but I kept on despite all difficulties and was not worried or distressed when I was involuntarily distracted. I did this during the day as often as I did it during the formal times specifically set aside for prayer. For at all times, at every hour, at every moment, even in the busiest times of my work, I banished and put away from my mind everything capable of diverting me from the thought of God. Okay. Maybe nothing that he hasn't said before in the other letters, but it's kind of down here in a very succinct form. But I think we need to break it down. Let's go back and break it down a bit so that we can understand from his simple declarative sentences here what it is that he's really talking about and how it can actually benefit us. So his goal is to find a means to be wholly God's, to belong to God completely. So he decides that he's going to give all to gain all. So he's going to be fully in on this. So after having given all to God in satisfaction for my sins, I begin to live as if there was no one in the world but him and me. All right. What do you think he means by giving all to God in satisfaction for my sins? How would that relate to us here today, to you in your life? Is there any one-to-one connection that you can make on that one?
I'd call it penance.
Okay. And how would you do penance, John?
I can't tell you how I really did penance. However, it's what he was doing. He says, that so after having given all to God in satisfaction for my sins, which is the penance, I began to live as if there were no one else in the world but him and me. So in other words, after doing his penance, then he was able to walk, quote unquote, in the shadow of God, or in God's shoes.
But you have no idea what this penance looks like.
I beg your pardon, say again?
You have no idea what this penance looks like?
In certain terms, no, but I would say that just in the mere fact that he was becoming at one with God at that moment, is how I took it.
Okay. How do we give all to God in satisfaction for our sins? Any thoughts on that? Any more thoughts on that?
What was the last word that you said?
Talking about giving all for the satisfaction of our sins. Giving all to God in satisfaction for our sins.
Thank you.
I think that's determining or setting our mind to the fact that we want to create a relationship that's intimate with God. And there's so many things in this world that distract us that are classified as sin or some form of separation from that one-on-one focused relationship with God, that he just determined to really get transparent before God with these things that he's holding on to, or that might be blocking his free flow of enjoying the relationship to its fullest, and just offering it, as it says in one of the letters I was reading the last couple of weeks. I can't remember if it was Corinthians or Galatians or whatever.
But
I'm sorry, John, what was that?
His confession, maybe?
Yeah, kind of like his confession. It was, sorry, I just lost track of what I was saying. I apologize. Let me regather myself here. But I
Talking
think
about Galatians and another book of Paul's.
yeah, just talking about how they want to get intimate with God, and Romans 12:1, I think, is where it says, in light of this, with God's help, you offer your everyday, ordinary life. You're coming and going, you're working, you're laying down, you're getting up, you're going to sleep. Offer it all to God. Because it's so often, for me, like I'm walking my dog in the morning, saying my prayers, or on my exercise cycle, saying my prayers, and it's easy to cover a lot of ground with, sorry about that, my dogs are barking, somebody's coming in the front door. It's easy to cover a lot of ground and not get down to business. It's easy to get distracted. And I think what he's saying is he really tried to be forthcoming about all the things that he thought were hindering his relationship or the depth of the relationship that was available with God. And I think when we finally give it all to God, not just those that we're immediately concerned with, but really give our all and all to God, there is a different level of relationship that's available and different levels of teaching that we're exposed to as we climb through these different levels. Make
Okay.
sense?
The transparency makes sense. Yes, absolutely. Ellen?
Yeah, I interpret it as you surrender it all to God. These are my burdens. I do not want to carry it anymore. The shame, the guilt, the regret, everything.
Right.
And you lay it, when they say you lay it down at the foot of the cross, you lay it down, you don't take it back. That's hard to do. But saying this is all yours, it's too much. I cannot carry it anymore.
They're good. And this is what's important. When we read something like this, what does it mean? How does it relate to us? How can we make this real for us in our lives? Because if we can't, then it's just words on the wall. It's not really going to help us.
I think that's what I was trying to convey earlier, that it's easy for us to say the words and pray our simple prayers and get ready for our day. But to live at the level he's talking about and the intimacy that he wants to achieve with God, you really have to get really transparent, real with yourself and real with God. Because anything you're trying to hold back or hope won't be discovered, he already knows about anyway, and he knows that it's keeping you from having the kind of conversations he wants to have with you.
Mm-hmm. What I like about what Scott's saying is that when you read this, especially if you're coming from a Catholic tradition like I did, and John did, we're talking about the penance. The penance used to be you go into confession, you confess your sins, and then you're given a series of prayers that you have to go out to the communion rail and recite, and that's your penance. And once you've completed your penance, then you were absolved and you were clean again. And so it becomes a very legalistic, kind of quid pro quo relationship. And even the way he writes it here, to give all to God in satisfaction for my sins, it still sounds like some kind of fair trade that's going on, that we have to pay somehow to expiate our sins. And I don't think that's what he's talking about. Maybe it was, but even if it was, it's not going to be helpful to me. And so how do I interpret this? And so Scott's talking about becoming transparent before God. I like that. Ellen's talking about laying down the burdens, which is maybe another way of saying the same thing, possible. But at least, not considering that you were still carrying around all that guilt and all that shame. We can let go of that. What came to my mind when I was reading this was step 1 of the 12 steps. To finally, admit that you're powerless in the face of everything that you're trying to do on your own steam. Your life is becoming manageable, but you are not able, in the direction you're going under your own power, able to make a difference and to change that. And to give all to God in satisfaction for my sins, that the sin is the separation, and we're having trouble with that because it's actually the egoic consciousness. It's that very muscle, that very mechanism that we use to try to control things and to power our way through things on our own, that we're letting go of when we admit that we're powerless. And that illusion of some kind of power is finally let go. And then, counterintuitively, that's when we can actually connect. That's when we can break through the sin barrier, when we let go of that, when we drop all of that. Now we're transparent, as Scott said. Now we're not carrying around the burden anymore that emotionally and psychologically is separating us from everyone and everything else. And so that, to me, was kind of the simplest way, is to just admit the powerlessness. Realize I'm not in control.
Mm.
Can I have you write all my speeches for me, Dave?
What's that, buddy?
Can I have you write all my speeches for me?
Just consider me chat AI.
That's right. Dave bot.
Doesn't it go along with step 3 too, of turning my will over to God? Because then that comes down to trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's what he's talking about in the next line. That lined up for me. So after having given all to God in satisfaction for my sins, completing step 1, he begins to live as if there were no one in the world but him and me. And to me, step 2 is already implied. You know, he's already come to believe that there's a power greater than himself, right? That can and will restore his life to sanity. But now, step 3, to actually just give yourself over to that power, to choose that power. Because to be powerless is not to be choiceless. And that's so important for us to make that distinction. Because if we are choiceless, then we're a victim. And sometimes we think of being powerless as being a victim, but it's not so. We can be powerless and still not a victim if we continue to understand that we have the power to choose. But what we have to do is choose the power greater than ourselves, hitch our wagon to that power, and that'll get us out of the ditch. And I think that's what's, you know, this living in the world as if there were no one but him and God. I mean, what more connection is possible to express than that, right? There is no one else in the entire world but I and thou. That means there's absolutely no distractions whatsoever. You're absolutely connected.
And doesn't that mean being really present? Because sometimes with my ADHD, I'm like a pinball wizard, because this connects to that, connects to this, connects to that. And it really takes, sometimes it's really easier than others for me just to sit and really focus on, you know, just not chattering away to God, you know, chatter, 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 but then just to sit and just be present and just allow it to bake.
I think that is absolutely perfect, Lori. And remember what our I don't know if you Indian or whatever that I just read. Remember what he said? Why can't the truth be said? What's the difficulty? The first and most basic reason is truth is always realized in silence. When your inner talk has stopped, then truth is realized. And that which is realized in silence, how can you say it through sound? It's simple experience. So the truth that we're talking about, this God, this first cause, you know, this Alpha and Omega, the only way we're really going to realize that presence is in silence. When all that inner chatter has stopped, when all that noise has stopped, when all the distractions are held at bay, then there's an experience as if I and thou were the only two entities in the entire world. No distractions, complete connect. And to me, that's the most beautiful way that you can understand step 3 of the 12 steps.
Imagine what kind of communication is possible when you clear your mind to that level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It may also be that that first part, giving all to God in satisfaction for my sins, you can maybe take a look at that as a 4th step. You know, finally accepting all the things that you would consider faults, or maybe your predilections to and your what's the word? Your vulnerabilities to certain activities or behaviors or whatever that are harmful. To finally come to terms with that, to understand that, and then, as Ellen would say, then to lay it all down at God's feet. You give it away. Hey, here I am. This is what Brother Lawrence is doing all the time. You know, he's saying, I'm just a screw up. Left to my own devices, I'm always going to mess it up. So anytime I do it actually right, is because God has done it through me. I didn't really do that. God did it through me. I think that's another way of maybe saying what he considers this first step is just admitting, you know, I can't do this on my own. I wouldn't know how. I would just mess it up.
That's the perspective I got, Dave. When I first heard that, I thought, here I am, just hopefully you'll just take me as I am, warts and all, with all my frailties and my faults, and I can still have that one-on-one relationship with you and just think of only you. So if you'll take me as I am, I'm here. I'll be here with you.
Perfect.
Dave, it made me think of a line you said a couple of weeks back. the difference between heaven and hell is whether or not I can accept this egoless state. And another thing you said is, I think it was T.S. Eliot who said that doors of hell are locked from the inside or something like that. So the idea, when I read that, it was like, or when you asked the question, I should say, is like giving God in satisfaction of my sins, like giving all to God in satisfaction of my sins. So basically anything that relates to this ego, this egoic functioning, is part of what separates me from or disconnects me from. I'm letting all of that go so that I can just experience heaven.
Mhm.
Experience
And, you know, I mean, think about that for just a second. How frightening is that?
it.
To really think about letting go of everything that makes you, you. Everything that's connected to your name in your head. And just to suddenly be, what, just free floating somehow? Or as the drop returns to the ocean, to lose all of that individuality and separation. You know, on the one hand, it's completely liberating. It's the most ecstatic you'll ever feel, you know, to that in loveness feeling. At the same time, how frightening was that? How terrifying is that? And so, you know, what you're saying, yeah, heaven will be, can you accept that egoless state? Can you accept not having that kind of individuality and be connected again? Or will you continue to resist it? You know, Milton's Satan, you know, that famous line of his, it's better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven, is really about that same thing, isn't it? To be able to rule in hell is to maintain your sense of control, to maintain that sense that you as an individual can exert your will here and there. But to serve in heaven would mean to just be one with. And that our minds resist that at every turn. Everything the ego is trying to do is to survive, to continue to survive as itself. And of course, we imagine heaven as being both, that we can have a sense of ourselves and be known as we are, but at the same time be connected. And so hopefully it's not either or, hopefully it's both and. That's what I like. I like that thought. You know?
We can still have some ego and, you know.
Heck yeah, I want to hang out with Billion in the next life, wheeling around galaxies or doing whatever the heck we do. I mean, that's heaven to me.
I'm down for
And
that.
have all the time to do it, you know? That would be amazing.
I was thinking about with the 12 steps of how wise it was about our higher power as we understood him. And I like it that it throws it in the past because it makes it fluid, that I'm not planted, that you know what I'm saying? That I am a fluid being too, and I can always improve and I can always have better understanding, that I'm not locked in. And I think this is kind of what Brother Lawrence is saying, is that I can't get locked in and my heart set on any one thing, because it's just like going back. You said that you read this how many years ago? You're in a different state than you were when you read it a bazillion years ago. And it turns fluid, because now in where you are now, you're able to see things in a whole different light and understand things in a whole different light. It just, to me, it goes along with the 12 steps, that I just never just lock in that this is the only way it is. This is, you know, that I box myself in.
I love that, Lauren. Except for the part about me being a bazillion years old. I'm not so thrilled with that. But other than that, perfect. I mean, look at all the different nuances we're getting here. You know, so this is there's no one right answer. Just take what you need and leave the rest. Pick and pull bits and pieces and weave together your own idea of what this means, something that you can actually work with as you go forward. That's what's going to be true for you, is what actually gets you on the road to this experience that Brother Lawrence is having and wants us to have as well, wants Reverend Mother to.
You know, one of the things that I really appreciated about 12-step program. I don't know how many of all of you have had experience with 12-step program, but a difference, an acknowledgement was made as to the difference between the 12 steps and the 10 commandments. The 12 steps were written in, and Lori alluded, she alluded to that the 12 steps are written in past tense. You know, we admitted, we came to believe, we got that. Whereas the 10 commandments say, "Thou shalt not," or "Thou shalt." And that said, to go back to something you said, Dave, about would rather rule in hell than to be of service and to be serving in heaven. I think I'm just the opposite of that. I would rather serve in heaven than to rule in hell, because that to me is a falsehood, ruling in hell. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, we can certainly take that line and abstract it. But the truth of the matter is, every one of us is hanging on to our egoic consciousness at some level. And that just goes to the territory. I mean, who are we if we're not the name that was given to us? Who are we if we aren't what we've experienced all our lives, our memories, our strengths, our weaknesses? I mean, who are we if we're not all that? If we're not our roles and our accomplishments and our attributes? I mean, that's death, and death is frightening, because then what? So to have some sort of existence where we don't have all of that, and yet it's okay, that's really hard to put together inside the mind. You can experience it when you step away from all of that, and it feels great. But then you start thinking about it again, and you get scared all over. So it's an interesting conundrum that we're in here. And of course, then we hope and we project that heaven will still retain enough of the egoic consciousness to keep us comfortable, but we don't know for sure. So interesting stuff. This next line is also interesting to me. Sometimes I consider myself before God as a poor criminal at the feet of his judge. At other times, I looked on him in my heart as my father and as my God. I don't know how you take this, we can beyond the literal. To me, it's a description of the macro and the micro that I've been, prattling on about here for the last month, isn't it? There are sometimes that he looks at God as his judge, that macro law. He's the criminal, he's the defendant, and then God is the judge. And so there's that sort of separation. He's down at the defendant's table, and God is up at the judge's desk, and everything is about justice and about this legal understanding, but it's all based on macro. And then the flip side of that is that he looks at him in his heart as his father and as his God, and now he's right back to that micro relationship and that connection. And it's neither one or the other. It's just always flipping back and forth, like that wooden medallion with the bird on one side and the empty cage on the other. And when you spin it, the bird's in the cage. It gets fused in the movement. But God and life and love are both of these. Love looks like justice in the macro, and it looks like mercy and compassion in the micro. And I think he's experiencing God in this oscillating, alternating way as both. And you don't resolve that as long as you're breathing it. We're always living between heaven and earth. We're trying to merge the two. And in the contemplative moment, we have merged the two. You still are an individual human being who is now experiencing this ultimate connection and oneness. But then as soon as we move back out of that space and we start thinking again, now we're back on earth. And then all that stuff remains. And then we move back into the moment with God. And now it's one again. But that's going to be a constant oscillation back and forth. And I think that's a beautiful description of it. Then he says, I adored him as often as I could, keeping my mind in his holy presence and recalling it as often as it wandered. Okay, so that word adored, does that mean anything to you? that is useful in your activities of daily living. He adored him as often as he could. How would you interpret that for your life?
You want to share, I guess, with everybody, and that's just a way to do it, I think.
Did you say to share this, Linda?
Yes,
Okay.
I guess you have to have the what comes first stuff, right?
How would you adore God as often as you could all throughout the day?
How are you asking me?
Nope, I'm asking everybody. Which includes.
I think for me, it's complete acceptance of, it goes back to the third step, the complete trust. And when I'm in that space of complete trust, there is a happiness that cannot be explained. It's just, it's a form of contentment. And it's just a form of being in the present moment, and life is sweet.
Very nice. Like I said, there's no wrong answer here.
Hmm.
Judy?
Yeah, for me, I think it can vacillate situationally, daily, what's going on for me at the time. But it vacillates between a sense of incredible awe at times with, coincidences that I never could have anticipated. And that I attribute oftentimes to his power, and his, and then I think I can roll pretty easily into just a sense of his embrace for me, just his love, his tenderness, his care, that just, it humbles me, it just floors me.
Mhm.
Kind of makes my knees weak,
Mhm.
if you will.
So wait a minute. So adoration for Judy is getting your knees weakened. I love that. That's a great image. That just that total abandonment. That's a lovely image. I like that. Okay, Ellen.
Oh, yeah, my interpretation is everything I do, my actions, my words, everything, my being is all done in your name for you. That's the adoration. So, when you talk about word, the limitation of our words, the adore, to me too, there's no word for it because we have cheapened the word adore. Oh, I adore that cheesecake, but that's not really what it means, right? It's more than it's that. To me, there's no word for it. We're limited to that word. Yeah.
When I think of, I'm sorry, John.
All right, go ahead, Kat.
When I was just thinking of the word adore, adorable, adore,
Right.
I think of things that come to my mind are like watching two puppies play is just absolutely adorable.
Yeah.
Watching a little child do something really simple is just absolutely adorable. And when I think about that with God, I think of it more, it's not a very reverent word necessarily. It's different. So if I put myself in that connection to adore God, I would probably choose a little bit of what Judy said, an embrace, almost like a child being embraced in a cuddly, really warm, secure feeling. That to me would be an adoring God. Somebody who's just gonna hold you and protect you and make you feel warm. But I guess, Ellen, I was thinking when you were admiration in a sense, I mean, that reverence of admiration of an awe of what God can do or what you see. But yeah, I guess that's adoration for me with God.
Yeah,
That's a different word. I wouldn't have thought of it.
yeah. But I think too, we're limited with our words. You see.
But I mean, if I were to read that literally, like I mean, thinking about it from my own faith place and my own practice of the presence of God. Like adoring God is, I don't think I've ever experienced that. I don't think I've even thought about what adoring God.
Have there ever been other things in your life, William, that you adore?
Hmm.
Well, I think we're gonna have to define a door for you, William. Have you ever had,
It's not
have
an
you ever
exit
gotten
in your
your,
room.
There's
Have you
that
ever
chat bot,
gotten-
Lori.
have you ever gotten weak knees?
Not for God. No, not for God.
Oh,
And yeah, it's a really interesting way to think about that relationship with God. Like I've said this in here before. I still think my relationship with God is largely an intellectual. And I don't know how to cross that chasm exactly. I try to lean into it, but it's not this experiential kind of thing that some of you guys talk about. It's
No, I
more
know
than-
exactly what you mean, William. I know
Mhm.
exactly what, do you remember those Magic Eye wall hanging pictures that
Mhm.
were made with a pixelated sort of art? And when you looked at them, it was just a bunch of dots, like pointillism. It didn't make any sense. But if you stood back a little ways and you relaxed your eyes, almost let them go cross-eyed, then suddenly this dimension opened up and you could see that they were dinosaurs in a 3D setting, or it was this, it was that. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
mhm.
William, I find it's kind of like that. The more we try to grasp God, the more we try to find a way to adore God, the more we, color inside the lines and read books and approach it intellectually, the more that we just don't have the experience. It's more about that, just stepping back and relaxing the focus, relaxing everything, just letting go. And then it happens, we're pulled in. It's not volitional. It's volitional to let go, but it's not something active that you do. You let it happen because it's already here and it's already happening. And it always is. And you can be a part of that flow if you allow yourself to be. But if you're exerting the effort, then you're at odds. It's a real strange thing. And it feels very different, I guess, than anything that we normally do.
But you know what, William, that makes sense. And I really, really appreciate your honesty with that. And I really think that, because I oscillate towards that too. And I think it's our background of a high demand religion that, that we are, I want to say, I don't want to say work, but yet trying so hard to find who God really is and how this is me. I could be, please don't let me put words in your heart or whatever, but some days I try so hard. In fact, I was writing the prayer during our contemplative time. And it's like, I've had the hardest time understanding how you answer prayers and who you really are. And I think it has to do with our background.
Mm.
I say bravo, William.
Mm.
Bravo that you would be so honest with us like that.
That's what this group is all about. We just put it out there. Yeah.
I have a question. Is it possible that we are trying to define a word with our focus today, or our mindset today, as opposed to what a 16th century definition of adored is? I mean, at that time, I was having a conversation to allude back to something you had said earlier, Dave, not today, but that to fear God doesn't mean to be afraid of God. To fear God, then to revere or respect God. And that's what that meant. It wasn't to be afraid of God.
Mhm.
Is that the same type of
Yes, we're trying to translate and interpret what it would mean when Brother Lawrence says that he adores God as often as he could. How would that translate to us? What can we do? And that's, I think, what we've heard from everybody in one way or another, how we would see adoring. Actually, I think Brother Lawrence answers the question in the next part of the sentence. He just says, keeping my mind in his holy presence and recalling it as often as it wandered. To me, I think that's what Brother Lawrence would say he means by adoring. So the word that I wrote in my margin was awareness, simple awareness of God, hanging on and keeping that awareness of God, not letting ourselves become, become so distracted that we're not aware of that extra layer on our daily activities. But not just awareness, but awareness with gratitude, maybe weak need gratitude, yeah. And also with the awe. And we've taken words like awe and adoration, as Kathy was pointing out, and turned them into these colloquial speak that they don't mean everything's awesome and everything's adorable. And whatever we mean by that, we're not talking about that here. Just like to fear God doesn't mean to be afraid of God. So we need to reinterpret those for our own use. But I think Brother Lawrence would say, I adore God as often as I can by keeping my mind in his holy presence and recalling it as often as it wanders away. As often as I become distracted, I bring myself back. I bring myself back. And just being present to God, being aware of God, being grateful for God, being awe-inspired by God, weak-kneed by God is adoring God. That's what works for me. And he says it hasn't been easy. I had no little difficulty in this exercise, but I kept on despite all the difficulties and was not worried or distressed when I was involuntarily distracted. So he's not necessarily beating himself up when he gets distracted. He just brings himself back. But notice the discipline. Even though it's difficult, even though he had to do it over and over and over and over, every day, he keeps coming back. And then he says, I did this during the day as often as I did it during the formal times specifically set aside for prayer. So there's no seams here. There's no dividing line between night and day and times of prayer and sacred time and formal time and everything else he does. It's just all one thing to him. He is just always doing this so that everything is a practice of presence. For at all times, at every hour, every moment, even in the busiest times of my work, I banished and put away from my mind everything capable of diverting me from the thought of God. And that's, I think, how he maintains his state of adoration, his state of presence. He's just constantly coming back. One of the contemplatives that I was reading said, don't think of when your mind wanders as that being a negative thing. He says, think of it as being an opportunity for practicing coming back. And I think Brother Lawrence would probably agree with that. See it as a positive opportunity for you to practice once again the art of recovery.
Right.
Coming back to center, coming back to connection again.
But Sherry,
Catching yourself when your mind is wandering is a moment of presence. That's you you're already back.
You just have to practice it. There's no other way this works. It's just practice, practice, and practice. And then after a while, it's just happening. It's just part of who you are. The habit is formed, right? The neural synapses have been formed, and it's just who you are. Now the law is written on your heart, and now you have the law of liberty, as James would say.
And then watching Sherry get licked by Bullet, that was adorable.
That was adorable. All right, that's all the time we've got for tonight. So we'll be back on the regular schedule next week. So Tuesday will be conversations, Wednesday will be the book study, and we'll finish up letter 12 and then jump into letter 13. And I will miss you all tremendously tomorrow night. It's going to be very strange not being with you, but I'll get James and Lori sorted out, hopefully. Although I'm not sure they have their marriage license ready yet. So it may be just a ceremony.
Oh, no.
I guess I'll find out tomorrow. I asked them last week, you got all the marriage, the license square went, no. And she obviously didn't have any clue about how it worked. So I gave her links and told her how it works, and we'll see if we got it done. If not, oh well. We'll just have to run around and get everyone's signature. Can you say back date? All
It
right.
doesn't count. It doesn't count. It's not valid until
Are we?
in the eyes of God, they're not.
It's so funny with so many of these, I mean, she's not that young, but these young couples, they're so focused on the ceremony and the party and the reception, they forget about the nuts and bolts of what makes this thing legal. You know, it's like, okay, cart and horse, right? Okay, Scotty, over to you, buddy.
Father God, we're so grateful for this time together as we search for deeper meanings and understandings of our experiences in this life and our relationship with you and what's possible and what we should avoid and what we should desire, what we find ourselves desiring, and whether it leads to a state of adoration or a state of repentance. We know that you use all those emotions for molding and shaping our character and our nature. Thank you, God, that you love us and care about every little detail of our life. We praise you and we thank you in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Good night. See you very
Thank
soon.
you.
Guys,
Thank
don't
you.
forget your homework, guys.
Take care.
What's the homework? I'm sorry.
It was the homework for tomorrow night about bringing the holy hand grenade for a conversation tomorrow.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow night, Linda.
See you.
Well, good night, John. Good night, Sherry. Good
Night.
Rosanna. Good night, Linda.
Night,
All right.
guys.
Good night.